mind taking your seats for a second? Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to IGDA Toronto's May event. The panel tonight is entitled Cover Me, How to Get Your Game Covered According to the Press. And sat alongside me here and to my right are the press themselves, some of Toronto's finest games journalists who will be introducing themselves shortly. So my name is Alex Hayter. I coordinate this panel with John Remedios, who is enjoying a sunny holiday somewhere as we speak, so he's not here. But before we get started, just some announcements to go through. There are IGDA survey sheets on your seats. Please return them filled out at the end. They're really a great way for us to get feedback from you on these events like this and all of our initiatives. There is also circulating right now, Ryan Henson-Creighton, who's on the committee, has lent out his iPad, and we're actually seeking email addresses from you guys so we can start a monthly newsletter. So if you get a hang of that, that'd be great to put your email in there. Immediately following the panel, there will be our monthly social at Bar 244, which is at 244 Adelaide Street West around the corner, so please join us at around 9 o'clock if you have time. We're doing one new thing for this panel that we haven't done before. It's a bit of an experiment. So for question period, which will be around 8:30, close to the end of the panel, we're going to be taking questions via Twitter. So if you have your mobile devices with you, you can use the hashtag IGDATO, and you can ask your questions to the panel. And this is sort of our way just to experiment a bit and see if we can get more people in the audience to participate and have more questions being asked. And as I said, just an experiment, so on your survey sheets, if you want to give us feedback on that stuff too, that'd be great to hear. So some committee announcements, game releases in the last month, or today even. So Damien Sommer and Emily Carroll's turn-based multiplayer game, The Yard, was released today. Available on theyard.com. MetaNet's Ninja Platformer N version 2.0 was released for free on May 17th. MetaNetSoftware.com. The nostalgia-inducing retro-style 2D platformer Super Robot World by Gardner Dixon was just released on Xbox Live Indie Games. And Toronto area team AREG, as real as it gets, sort of an initialism, is launching a Kickstarter campaign this weekend for a haptic feedback jacket that interfaces with video games, which is about as awesome as it sounds. There's also some events coming up very soon. Tomorrow night, in fact, there is a skill swap for the technical art of Assassin's Creed 3. Skill swaps are basically these seminar events where some professional comes in and teaches people for free, and it's awesome. And that happens at George Brown College, 341 King Street East. On June 15th, there's the Toronto Global Game Jam Arcade from 10 on June 15th from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., which shows a variety of local made games, jam games, and a series of speakers for an awesome all-day event. June 20th to 23rd, the Ghost Arcade is a pop-up video games arcade and exhibit in London, curated by Toronto's Scott Deeming. And on June 21st at Bento Mizo, there is a Dames Making Games speaker social for the Unicorn Games Incubator, which is an awesome initiative for women making games in Toronto. And I would now like to thank our very generous sponsors who make events like this possible. We have Ubisoft Toronto, the City of Toronto, KPMG, Massive Damage, Big Viking Games, Emmanuel Edemon, Get Set Games, and the Academy of the Impossible. And now I'd like to introduce Matt Hartley, an award-winning journalist and editor of the Financial Post, Tech Desk, and Post Arcade, who will be moderating tonight's panel. So welcome to Matt, and welcome to all of our panelists.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to attempt to move this up a little bit so I can see the faces of the panelists. So we're going to see how this goes first. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the night. My name is Matt Hartley. I am the editor of the FP Tech Desk at the National Post and Post Arcade, which is our wee little game site that we started in September of last year. We are aiming to cover the international and the Canadian gaming space. We're trying to put a local face on it, and we'd love to hear more from all of you here as well. We've been really trying to reach out to the indie community and try to do some more indie games as much as possible, because we think it's an amazing community here, and we've done a lot of work with the sort of broader tech startup community in Toronto, and frankly there's just a lot of amazing things going on here, so we'd like to hear more about your stories. Starting at the far end, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves to you, and then we'll get started. We'll have some time for questions at the end. I'm going to start, and then if you guys have stuff that you'd like to ask, we'll obviously try to get to as many of those, either through Twitter or in person, because really, we've got a really nice collection of journalists up here, and you're all here to hear what they have to say, so as much as I want to ask my questions, and I think they're important, we want you guys to feel like you got everything out of this night as possible, so take it away.
Oh, great. Hello, everybody. My name is Marissa Roberto. You can see my face on two really awesome shows on television right now. One of them is called EP Daily, where we talk about the latest and everything cool every single day. And another show where we review video games. I review mobile games on a show called Reviews on the Run. And I think that's all I have to say about myself. Should I go into more detail?
We're going to ask you some other questions about stuff.
Oh, okay, great. So, yes, good to meet you.
Hi, I'm Jim Squires. My face isn't pretty enough to be on television, unfortunately. But I am the editor-in-chief at Gamezebo. We cover social games, mobile games, anything that's downloadable, really. We sort of started out with a casual bent many years ago, but that's kind of morphed and transformed into what it is today. Just about any game that would be made by anyone in this room would probably be a good candidate for what we cover. So I'd be someone to get a card from when you leave. I've been with them since 2009. I started out covering mobile games when iPhone gaming was still kind of new and no one knew what to do with it. I've been editor-in-chief for 18 months. That's really all there is to say about me, I guess. Wrote a few things for Joystick, Touch Arcade, here and there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Daniel Kaszor. I'm a columnist for Post Arcade at the National Post. Also during the day, I'm just a news editor that has nothing to do with video games, but I'm sort of Rockforded out today. Anything else? So I've been covering games since probably 2010 or so for the Post. Basically, I started when I started bugging the arts editor if I could start writing about them, and then he said, sure, if you do it after work. So that's kind of been how it's been building since then. So yeah, and I like to cover the Toronto scene too.
I'm Andrew Webster, and I'm a reporter for the Verge. It's a website. .com. Yeah, and I cover games mostly. Basically, whatever I think is cool, and sometimes other things that aren't video games.
I'm Matt Braga, and right now I work for the Financial Post, but I only started in February. Before that, I worked as a freelance journalist, and I did stuff for the Post and the Globe, Ars Technica, the website called Tested, and some other local stuff. Writing about technology, but also games sometimes as well, so I was kind of split, between doing all of those things, which was kind of nice. So, I don't come from the same sort of institutional background per se as these guys, but I sort of did a thing for everybody, which is kind of fun.
Okay, well, maybe just to get a little bit more background about everybody, I'd like to hear whether or not games journalism was something you really wanted to get into, and kind of how you got into the industry. Why don't we start with you, Mr. Braga, and we'll go the other way this time.
Sure. So I think part of the reason why I started off writing about games is it was a natural extension of sort of the two things that I like to do, which was write and play games. So it seemed like a thing that made sense. I really liked playing games, and I wanted to have a way to sort of explain some of the feelings and thoughts and experiences I had while playing these games. And so that sort of turned into me pitching editors at the Globe and editors at the Post and saying, hey, these games came out, I want to try it out, I want to write about it, that sort of thing. And I find that over time it's evolved from, I think like all things, you kind of start out, approaching things the way that everyone else does, where, you write about games, you kind of just do reviews because everyone else is doing reviews. And then as you do more of them, you realize, oh, actually, I kind of like, focusing on the way that people do sound design or the way that people sort of approach, weird technical challenges and things like that. So I guess long story short, I kind of write like writing about games, not as much from a straight review perspective, but sort of a, let's talk about all the little bits and pieces that, may not get as much love or care or attention as in other places. So that's kind of what drew me to this whole thing.
Yeah, so I just sort of wanted to be a journalist, and somehow when I was at York, I sort of fell into a gig at Mars Technica, which is also a website about covering games, and I freelanced for several years for them and for other places, Gamezebo, GamePro, RIP, stuff like that. And then I got a gig at the Verge full time where I just sort of wrote about news and stuff, like tech news and science and whatnot, and I somehow convinced them to let me write full time about games, even though they just launched the shiny, expensive gaming site called Polygon. Did we get that?
You move the mic up, there you go.
That's why I was trying to adjust mine earlier, but it just kind of like stays squat.
Did we hear any of that? Or?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, whoever that was.
I attribute my games writing mostly due to a lack of long-term planning and general stupidity. When I was in undergrad in film and media studies, I was always a fan of games, and I felt that there was just a lot more interesting new criticism in the gaming space. I felt that was sort of a growth industry in criticism, where if you look at film, it feels like most of the stuff that was really interesting to say in the critical space happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And with games, it's just brand new and interesting, and there's a lot to dive into, and there's a lot to analyze, and there's a lot to sort of dig your teeth into. But I never actually planned on writing about games in a more professional sense until I actually just sort of backed my way into it when I got to the Post, and we weren't covering games at all. I think I just realized that we had a giant full-page ad for Final Fantasy 13 on our page 3 or something, and then we didn't write about it at all in the paper. And I mean, Final Fantasy 13 in many ways did not deserve to be written about, but it just seemed very odd to me, and I was like, this is a modern medium, and people growing up from now on are going to be playing games. We should be covering it.
Is spite a fair reason to start a career in game journalism? Because that was actually it for me. I know that sounds crazy, but there was a specific games journalist who will remain unnamed who kind of pissed me off, and I decided I could do it better, and that's what led to it. Luckily, that was around 2005, and I was a stay-at-home dad with plenty of free time. So I was able to, that was kind of the big moment for blogging, I think was right around then, 2005, 2006, where you could start your own blog and you could end up somewhere in the long run. Thankfully, that's what happened. Now I'm at a point, it's been a lot of ups and downs and a lot of ways to get here, but it's nice to be at a point where we can kind of steer what we're doing, and right now my passion, I'm sure everyone on the panel here would agree, is kind of games that are unique and fresh and that are sort of moving the medium forward, and I love that I'm in a place where I get to write about that. So yeah, Spike got me the greatest career in the world, and I can't complain.
My answer is not spite. When more than a few years ago, I had a quarterly life crisis, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I had no idea, but I knew that video games made me really happy. So I wanted to do something in that space, and I've been a fan of these two shows for a long time, and I was just obsessed with Victor Lucas, and I really wanted to make sure that I worked really hard so that one day maybe he would recognize that I was putting a lot of work into what I was doing, and this world that he loves so much because I loved it too, and then one day he'd give me a shot to then talk about the things that I love, and then this is like the really short version. And then one day he did. After I snuck into Fan Expo saying I was media, even though I wasn't media, and I totally snuck in, and I had an interview with him, and I met him, and that's kind of how things went. That was like really condensed version. There's a lot of crap that happened too, but okay, you don't need to know about my life story. It was a quarterly life crisis. That's my answer.
Well, it's one of the reasons we started Post Arcade is that obviously we found that there wasn't a ton of outside of the traditional sort of newspapers and TV and that kind of stuff. So that was sort of the voice we tried to add to it. So the question that I think a lot of people here would like to know is, and it doesn't matter who starts this one, but how do you find out about new games? Like, where do you guys go to sort of discover what's hip and fresh and new, and what you decide what you want to cover?
Twitter. I guess if you want someone to write about your game, just get Nathan Bella to tweet about it.
Everyone's following Nathan on Twitter. Good on that. Okay.
Back,
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, honestly, it's a lot of, there are so many ways to find out about good games, but developer outreach just directly to us, and I'm sure that's a topic we'll touch on more as the panel goes on, but my inbox hits like 1,500 emails a week, and most of that is from people I've never heard of before pitching me a game, and a lot of the times it's really cool stuff. So, getting out there and pressing the flesh and meeting us and emailing us and hounding us endlessly is that's easily the best way to find out about games that other people aren't covering yet, because I don't know about you guys, but if everyone else is already talking about it, I'm late to the party,
Marissa, from a TV perspective, how do you guys decide what ends up on the shows?
Well, Sean and I are covering a lot of mobile games, just like an excessive amount now because we started doing triple plays. So we're reviewing usually around 16 games a week. So what we do is we obviously get a lot of emails from people pitching games to us, which is great. We always applaud that. And then I usually like to scour the App Store because a lot of the editors' choices aren't the greatest, and I like to highlight that a lot of the time. So that's usually where I go. Also, we go to App Shopper a lot too.
I also do App Shopper.
Okay,
Yeah.
like that's where that's usually the basis of where, because we have to group. We like to make triple plays now where we group things into the same kind of category. So it's just about coming up with new ideas for new triple plays. And but honestly, like emails are great. Like when people pitch us their game, I'll usually take that game and then try to build a triple play around it. So usually emails where it first starts.
and persistence is good, because as much as our inboxes are constantly deluged with things, if I have 50 unread messages sitting in my inbox and yours is all the way at the bottom, and you email me again, then there's a better chance that I'll say, oh right, you emailed me, I'm gonna do it again. Which is it's just the nature of how these things work. Back when I used to have more free time, actually, and I don't really know how necessarily you guys would break into this per se, but I used to find out about a lot of sort of new or interesting or just quirky things that I would have never sort of stumbled upon myself on message boards. So even whether it would be sort of someone on my, used to be big into a TF2 server that I played a lot, and I remember we all had sort of a forum and people would sort of throw out like, oh, I discovered this cool game on a blog or something, and they would sort of message it there or mention it there. Or as unforgiving as NeoGAF can be, I've definitely discovered or used to be able to discover a fair share of games on places like that, and part of that is probably just being able to build up buzz in the first place, but I'm sure there's probably no harm in sort of just jumping into some of those like, hey, what games have you heard about this week threads, and just saying, hey, this is what I'm working on. So hey, who knows?
Now this is going to sound really conceited, but figure out a pitch that fits my gaming interests and then send me an email along those lines. Or even better, if you can fit it into 140 characters, I'll probably be more apt to read it. Like for example, if you have a game that's Persona 4 but without the combat and multiplayer, like the way that Damien's game was pitched to me yesterday, then I'd be really interested.
I didn't do that.
Well, whoever did, figure out other people that can make your game sound good. That sounds really weird, but like I know that I have a limited bandwidth for the amount of stuff that I can do, and if it doesn't really grab me right away, I'll probably just put it on the back burner, and then that doesn't mean don't bug me about it again, but it might mean that I'm not going to write about it. So.
Dan, that leads into my next question, which is, as everybody in this panel can attest to, if my inbox isn't at 500 every day, then it's usually a U.S. holiday. We get just literally thousands of emails a week, and especially when you're sort of more general assignment, or if you're like Braga who does tech and games aren't his only thing. The noise gets really loud really quickly. So how can, Dan, you said, condense your pitch into 140 characters, get it on Twitter, but what are some other ways that someone can catch your eye that about a game can kind of stand out. Anyone want to take that?
Well, with how many emails I go through a day, it's kind of embarrassing how many hours I have to put into my email each day, and I really should just learn to let it go, but I don't. But because of that, I have to go through emails really, really quickly. And honestly, just by the nature of the job, that really is the easiest way to reach us, but it's also the toughest way to get our attention. So when I open them, an email gets 5 to 10 seconds. I read the first line or two. I look for a screenshot, a YouTube link, a link to download the game. I click that way because visually you can take in a lot very quickly. And I know it's not really fair to judge a game based on a screenshot, but when you get as many emails as we do, we've got to make quick decisions, right? So try to get those first couple of lines and nail it. Nail the point you want to get across. Make links clear. Just try to be as visual as you can. If I open that email and I see a big, gorgeous, beautiful picture of a game I've never seen, I'm probably going to read the whole email. That's what's got to catch my attention. Once my attention is caught, I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm probably going to reply, and I'm probably going to want to cover your game. So.
On the flip side too, remember that some email clients don't load images by default.
True.
Yeah, international post.
Which we can't control that. So that's also something that is good to maybe try to put in alternate sort of ways to catch people's eyes. I know me personally, just the way that I have my email client set up, especially my personal one, it places a lot of stock in showing me just the subject line and not any of the little bits afterwards. So if you can sort of be really meticulous about what you throw into a subject line, that can be pretty great. Mentioning maybe what platform it is, what sort of game it is, whether you're making a strategy or some sort of FPS or a fun little roguelike something. Like if you just put that in the subject line, that's definitely handy. Sometimes even before mentioning the name, if you have sort of a really, this is a bad example maybe, but if you just have a boring name like Battle Mech 4, that might not catch my, attention. So would you play Battle Mech 4? Like I said, it was a bad example, right? But it's one of those things where the more sort of information you can just throw right in the subject line to be like, why should I read this versus the 50 million other funding announcements in my inbox? That's always a good thing.
So if they called that like Robotech, but with ninjas in the subject line, would that
that could be
catch
cool.
your attention?
Yeah, or not like Final Fantasy 13 for Dan.
we make it a policy to open any email that deals with ninjas.
Yes.
Dude, that just got us in so much trouble.
Sorry.
At a more technical level, differentiate your game from the. I would say I probably get pitched 10 games that I will never, ever, ever write about every single day, and it's just sort of like, no, I don't really care about this, free to play shovelware. And if you can figure out a way to make it not seem like free to play shovelware, that it has like a creative spark behind it, I'll be much more interested in it. And frankly, most of the stuff that's coming out of Toronto does that, but it just needs to be able to highlight that right away.
Okay. What do you, there's obviously a bunch of different things that we all do, whether it's reviewing games, you're going to write one particular way, or you're going to produce a segment in a particular way. If you're going to do something that's more maybe analytical, or if you're going to profile a company, you're going to be looking for different things. But let's take a, let's say you're going to do something that's about more than maybe just a simple review of a game. If you wanted to do a bigger story, what are you looking for in a story about a game developer or a game if you're looking to do something that's not simply a review?
It just needs to be something different. It needs to be something fun and exciting. And if you're fun, I just feel like if you pitch me something that you're really proud of, that you feel like could be a really compelling story that can be packaged in 2 minutes, that can be shown on television, if you pitch something like that to me, I will for sure pitch it to my executive producer, absolutely, because we want more stories like that. I would love to visit you at your place of work. I would love to see all the work that goes behind what you're doing, especially if it's something really cool that you're making and that you're really proud of. So I think that's it for me. It just has to be something that we can have fun with, because it needs to be fun. It needs to be quick for television, because we lose people's interests really quickly.
I think as long as it's a unique story, I think it's probably going to do worth covering. I don't know if Owen Goss is in the room. If he is, he can. Oh, I saw a hand go up. I'm going to say yes. He recently released Fingertide Junior, which is an iPhone version of his iPad game, Fingertide, which is very nifty.
I just reviewed that today.
See, there you go. It's excellent. If you haven't played it, you totally should. Either version, really. But when he pitched Fingertide Junior to me as a review, my gut instinct was, well, we already covered Fingertide on the iPad, and yeah, it's a little different, but who knows how different it is at this point. It was early in the, he just reached out to me once and that, and he explained to me, he's like, no, because of the iPhone version, we really had to rework it, and it's an entirely different game in terms of how the puzzles have been designed in that. And I thought, well, why review it again when there's such a good story already built into this? And Owen actually wrote a great editorial for us explaining the challenges he had that he faced transitioning from the iPad to the iPhone. And it's a fantastic read, and to me that's a great kind of unique story that dives a lot deeper than any review's gonna.
I think anytime you can talk about sort of challenges or just unforeseen things that happen during the development process, I personally find that sort of stuff fascinating, and I think a lot of other readers would as well. And I mean, I can think of a number of examples where I've interviewed people who talked about they thought they were designing one game and then ended up with a totally different game in the end. And if you're willing to open up about that sort of stuff, then I mean you can sort of create this really sort of neat window into sort of how you work as a person and how your maybe your development process functions or your studio functions or that sort of thing. I think another thing that I personally like as well is that if you can maybe put yourself into our shoes where we, how do I put this? If you can think of a couple of different angles that may be sort of outside of the norm that we may be thinking about when we're talking to you, like let's say you're making a game that we wouldn't necessarily think on the surface to ask you about all the work that you put into the music, but you put a lot of work into the music. And that's the sort of thing that you can maybe bring up and talk about and discuss. And I mean, I can think of, I remember I was interviewing, I can't remember his name, but I was interviewing someone who worked on Portal 2, and I had gone into the interview not even remotely thinking to ask about music, and it ended up having this 15, 20-minute conversation about like all the troubles with sort of writing music to a puzzle game when someone can spend 5 minutes doing a puzzle or 20 minutes doing a puzzle. So I guess the point there is, think of sort of things that, you really want to talk about, as well as things that, you sort of expect that we want to talk about, and maybe try to, meld those together in a way to create, give us something that we might not think to ask.
Yeah, I would just agree with that, because I know, for me personally, when I pitch stories to my editors, I can't just say this is a really cool game. There's got to be an angle there, a reason why it's cool. So yeah, basically just what Matt said.
Yeah, just to build on that quickly, as an editor and someone who has people pitching him on stories about games, I always look for that sort of that extra hook, that thing that kind of separates that game or that developer away from the rest of the pack. Whether it's there's certain stories that everybody likes to read, like in business, the comeback story is always great. The sort of the how we screwed up and then we fixed it story is really great, because those are stories that other people can read and they empathize with it and they can kind of learn something from it. So that's always something really good. Just out of let's take it sort of beyond the pitch, beyond Twitter and email. One of the things that a lot of people in this room are obviously up against is Ubisoft or EA or whoever. I mean, they've got armies of people who we are in constant contact with, who are telling us what's coming down the pipe, and they have access to these big, the sort of the big PR megaphone. If I'm a small game developer and I'm looking to get the word out, beyond Twitter, beyond the email, like how can I reach you guys? Like, is it just at events? Is like how do I do it?
Well, yeah, sure, at events, but I feel like I'm so easily accessible. I feel you can just really add message on Twitter. You really can just find me on Facebook. You really can just email me. I just feel like I'm here for you. If you want to send me something, if you like really anything at all, I feel like I'm here. Like I'm out there. That's what social media is for. I feel like that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I would agree. I know I've mentioned Twitter many times, but I've built up sort of relationships with a number of developers who sort of aren't in Toronto, who I've never met in person, via Twitter, just talking to them. And then, you meet up at GDC or something, or they pitch you your game and you remember who they are, right? Because you know them.
I think that's key, is the building of personal relationships. It's, that's on us too. Part of our job is to what's happening and what's cool and who to talk to. And at the same time, we're real people. Follow us on Twitter, and you'll probably see, if you're following me, way too many tweets about Rob Ford and the human
Yeah, you need to put on that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just basically if you reply me, I will probably follow you back, and then once I sort of get to know you a little bit and what you guys are doing, then I'll be far more receptive to a pitch when I sort of know where it's coming from, where I already know sort of the backfill on your story, when you give me the 2 or 3 lines about why I should be interested right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Just-
all the relationships.
Yeah, just don't be like spammy. Because I know a lot of times people pitch me over Twitter, and then you click their name, and their account is just the same message.
Oh, to everybody,
50
yeah.
journalists, and it's a turn off.
And beyond social media as well, I mean, events really are great. Just try to be where we're going to be. Like Bit Bazaar was, 2 weekends ago, I think? And I went home from that, and I ended up writing about 3 games I had never heard of before I set foot in that place, and it was fantastic. I had a great time, and events like that are a great place to find us. I mean, I can't say that everyone in that room was a journalist, but I certainly knew a lot of faces when I was walking around there. Social media is a great way to follow up in other ways, but being at events, and then as well, if you are, I mean, obviously a lot of people in this room are already friends with each other. If you have friends who've had a successful game, they may already have a great network of people built up in the press. And I'm not saying you should abuse your friends, but that's what friends are for, right? But no, if your friends, believe in your game as much as you do, they'd probably be happy to help you reach out. I've certainly had a lot of introductions made via other developers, and it's usually panned out pretty well.
Jim is actually totally right. I'm probably more inclined to respond to an email if there's someone I've worked with before, or there's someone who's been really good with me and who's trusted me, and they say, hey, my friend is working on this really awesome game, you should talk to them. It's generally a little easier for me to put a little bit of trust into that, as opposed to just sort of like cold emails that I've never sort of heard before. I don't know if that's true for everybody. But
That's how I found out about Proteus. Proteus is awesome.
We've got an interesting cross-section of people here whose stuff is syndicated both inside and outside of Canada. How important is a Canadian connection to what you're writing about? or is it?
Yeah. I was going to say incredibly important to me personally, but professionally not nearly as important. I think it's my job to make sure that we're covering the best games regardless of where they're from. But I do have that secret part of me that is always hoping and praying for a great Canadian developer to reach out to me. And there's a reason that I'm at an event in Toronto right now. Like I enjoy this community, and the best I can do to try to represent that, through the press, I'm happy to do. But again, though, the flip side is I have no choice, but I have to cover everything out there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing my job right.
Yeah, whenever we do a game, mobile game on the show, if it's made in Toronto especially, we're just so proud of it. We'll always say, this is made right here in Toronto. Like, it's a huge deal for us. We're always really proud. But yeah, we have to cover everything from everywhere.
On the flip side, that also works to your advantage, because generally I find, you can pretty much pitch any publication anywhere, and they won't really care about where you're from. So I mean, you could go to a U.S. publication, you could go to European publication, someone based in Sweden, Japan. Like, it doesn't really matter. I think if you just have a cool game, they will also be more inclined to cover something that comes from anywhere, in the same way that we're inclined to sort of cover things that come from anywhere. So that's don't limit yourselves just to, as much as we'd love to write about you, don't just limit yourselves to Canada, and definitely sort of look elsewhere to places that fit the sort of stuff that you're working on. So.
I'm much more willing to cover something when I can talk to the person in person instead of over the phone, and so that means that I'll be just in that way more inclined to cover something in Toronto.
Let's talk a little bit about exclusives and embargoes, because these are obviously things that trip some people up. How important, let's start off with exclusives. How important is it for you to write about something first? If you're not the first one to it, are you still going to write about it? Whoever wants to start.
Not the best answer. I think that, and I don't know if everyone's going to agree or not, but I've been burned on exclusives enough times now that the word doesn't carry as much weight with me as it probably should. I know if I ask, room knows what the word exclusive means, I'd see every hand go up, and I promise that would not be correct. I get emails regularly that say, we have an exclusive for you, and because I've worked at many places, I still have old email addresses. I'll get the same cut and paste email to different email addresses. That's an exclusive to me, right? Now that being said, if I know for a fact that I'm going to have the opportunity to write about something first, I think I'd be more inclined to write about it. I'm not going to write about something just because I've been offered an exclusive, nor am I going to avoid something just because you won't give me an exclusive.
But if you're first in, that is.
There's a bonus to it, yeah. There's definitely some incentive to that, just knowing that, I mean, goodness, for SEO purposes alone, it's nice to be the first one to get that name out, right? So, yeah, it doesn't suck.
It doesn't suck. Anyone else want to take a crack at that one? Exclusives?
Yeah, I don't really care.
Okay.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's again, like if you can, write about something. I mean, I guess it kind of falls on us in some cases where if we can think of an angle that's new or interesting or better than ever, and that's, as writers, we always try to be better than everyone else because, it keeps us, it gives you something to compare yourself against. So if you can say, oh, all these people have written about this game, but just done a really sort of like really boring surface explanation, and then I can get in touch with you and you can give me this like big in-depth sort of look at what you've done, then that's always good too. In some ways that can be, just as good as having an exclusive, just having a different story than what everyone else has. So actually, if there's something that might be good is that look at it, if you look at all the other coverage that's been done of you and you aren't happy with sort of, not happy in the sense that maybe, people haven't really gone as in-depth as you think, your game warrants or, this whole production cycle you've done warrants, then you can maybe go to people and say, hey, everyone's kind of just written a few lines about us. How would you like to, go a little more in-depth and write something about us? Sometimes that works just as good as an exclusive, so.
I'm just going to throw this out there. For a lot of you guys, exclusives won't be worth it. With an exclusive, there has to sort of be a pre-existing relationship with the audience. The reason that somebody would go somewhere to read an exclusive about something would be because they are anticipating or interested in it to begin with. And when you're basically starting from zero, I would say that it's probably way more useful to be in as many places as you possibly can. I'd love it if you gave us an exclusive. That'd be great. But I don't know how useful that would be for you guys. Sorry to have it.
No, that's fine. We do like exclusives. Embargoes. Sometimes they're a necessary evil in the reporting world. How do your publications treat them, and what do you think of them?
I hate them. I don't know. There's just so many things that can go wrong with embargoes, right? Where if we've seen it all the time, where someone goes to 5 different publications and says, "Hey, your embargo's at 7:30," and someone says, "Oh, my embargo's at 7," and then breaks it at 7, and then you're on. It's a logistical nightmare, and I think a lot of times it's not worth it as much as people think. Especially to sort of riff on what Dan said before. I think at this point, for the same reason that exclusives aren't really worth it, I think embargoes kind of aren't really worth it. I mean, does it matter?
I think embargoes have gotten a little bit murkier too in recent years, especially for mobile games. So many companies test their games first in Canada or New Zealand or that sort of thing, and I'll get an email saying, "Oh, we've got an exclusive. We're going to announce this game on Thursday. It's coming out. We want to announce it." I say, "But I've been playing it on the Canadian App Store for 4 months. That's not. Why would that be an embargo? Like we've written about it. You're out of your mind." And so it's murkier than it used to be. I can see them as being a necessary evil, but it's still kind of a pain in the butt.
I'm going to start taking questions on the Twitter feed. If you guys want to start tweeting on the IGDA, you know what the hell it is.
IGDA TO.
There you go. That's just too many letters all for me. But we got one here. A question for all of you here. Now, obviously, there's probably some people in the audience here who are aspiring games journalists who want to know a little bit more about the industry. So let's start off with sort of what advice you would give to game journalists looking to break into the industry.
Don't do it.
It's a sinking ship. Run away.
Yeah.
Besides the obvious.
And if you are insistent on doing it, don't become a games journalist. Become a journalist or writer, and then specialize in games. Having a much broader set of skills is a lot more useful than just drilling down and saying, "I can only do this."
Also, just never feel like, it sounds terrible, but never feel like you're entitled to
my favorite sort of story is I kind of became semi-friends with the guys who do Giant Bomb, and I always remember how they did a really, really good job at getting to where they were by not really giving a shit. So in other words, they didn't really get a lot of games ahead of time. That changed later on as they became more established. But for a long time, they didn't get games, when they came up beforehand. They just had to go and buy them the day of. Or, I remember when Kinect came out, Microsoft was so afraid of what they would say that they had to go buy Kinect on the same day as everyone else. So I guess the roundabout point I'm making here is just, if you want to write about games, just go and do it. Just get games that you're interested in. Don't necessarily expect to make a lot of money doing it, but if you have an interest in writing about them and have something interesting you want to say, do it.
Yeah, be like John Baum, have like 15 years of game industry experience before you launch your site.
Oh, well, come on, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Now, you both work for me. Be careful.
Yeah, I would just echo what Dan said, that basically, if you want to do this as a career, you should definitely be a journalist and a writer first, and like a fan of games second. Especially if you're freelance, because if you just write about games, you're gonna need another job, like for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's a job for sure.
Do it because you love it. Don't do it because you want it to be your job. That's really, the job will come afterwards, right? That's
Maybe.
sort of- Well, yeah, if you're lucky, right?
Right.
You might also still be bagging groceries. Either is fine.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, not at all. I worked at Blockbuster for years while I was doing this for free. It happens, right? I take no shame.
Now, a lot of sites will take content for free. Won't pay writers for it, they'll pay them in a byline. What do you guys think of that?
I worked for free for online gaming magazine for a long time before anything. And I just assumed that would happen. I knew that I wasn't going to get paid for it, and I just did it because I knew this is what I wanted to do. So I just understood that came with the territory.
I think it depends on like where you're writing for. If you feel you're getting value being published in a certain wherever it is, but like just don't give all your shit away for free. It's, right? Unless you feel like you're actually getting something back. If you're publishing somewhere that you like, that you read, and you think they publish good stuff, then it's a personal choice. But just don't give all your stuff away. It's really stupid.
Well, you're building your brand too, right? So I would say that at first it's hard to not do it for free unless, if you come out of journalism school and you've interned and you've got doors open to you, fantastic, right? But yeah, I would absolutely echo what you said there. It's, like I said, I did it for years for free and it's not that bad. That said, there are some sites that it's surprising when you learn that they pay nothing for what's on there, considering how well they seem to do. It's sort of a financial proposition because a lot of the sites out there are run by people who do it because they love it and they're not making any money at it. It's costing them money. So when you come in to write for them, you can't really expect a paycheck either. Right? It's all about the level where people are at.
Well, I guess that's not true. I was getting paid in games.
True. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I did make something, I guess.
Which is, of course, the most ethical thing that you can possibly do, and something that we've all done.
Right.
Also, the longer you write somewhere for a byline, the less you're getting out of each time you're doing it. So that byline is worth much less to you at year 1, year 2, year 3 into it. So after a certain point, you've got a lot of bylines on site X. It might not be worth getting any more.
I'd like some general thoughts. This is a question from the audience about sort of ethics in game journalism, because obviously, this is an evolving industry. This is an area where, there are certain, there was a time when there were certain publishers who would expect favorable coverage for early access to a game or to a system or something like that. How do you guys feel that relationship between the games press and the industry / the PR side of things? How do you see that evolving, and does more work need to be done in that area to sort of clean up the ethics in this area?
I think there's probably going to be some sort of watershed moment where gaming, people who handle PR and sort of press for games is going to have to change, because it just works in such a strange and totally different way than, music reviews or film reviews where, people let you see things beforehand and you write a review and then there it is. You don't get these, sort of angry calls from, PR people or people in gaming companies or, the threat of never getting a pre-release copy of things again. All of which sort of seem to happen in the, gaming journalism PR side of things, which is kind of crazy. And I feel like, once once things start to level out and games start to sort of be treated as, you know, a similar sort of medium to, you know, movies and music and I say that, but I mean, you know, in the mainstream sense where they're sort of treated on the same level where it's just sort of another piece of media that people consume and oh, a new game comes out, so of course people are going to review it and, you know, we're not going to care as much about what people think. I think then, you know, things will get a little better. But right now there seems to be a strange sort of imbalance between the way that reviews and sort of pre-release copies and things are handed out for games versus, let's say, you know, an album or, you know, a film.
I would say that it's so weird and nebulous between what is PR and what is journalism at this point. I mean, there are a lot of people that are clearly and obviously journalists, and there are a lot of people that are clearly and obviously PR, but there's also a lot of people that sort of float in between who write interesting stuff about games, but also are flacking for one or two, or are writing interesting things about games, but are helping out their friend by running PR for one. I mean, honestly, like in Toronto, there are a lot of people that are in that in-between space, and I don't think they're really compromising their ethics too much. But it's, I mean, as long as you're sort of clear about what you're doing. I also don't know if there will be something that we think of as game journalists in 10 years. That a lot of the bigger companies are streamlining that so much so that they're just getting direct voices out to audiences. So our time as middlemen and middlewomen might be over.
Okay.
Sorry, am I too depressing?
Will there still be games in 10 years?
No. Kidding.
Another question from the audience here. What's the most memorable game you've written about in the last year?
I want to say the yacht. Within the last week, right? That's tough. I mean, we cover so many games, right? Am I crazy in thinking that? Maybe you guys are lucky and you cover many less than I have to. I love that. It's the best. Yeah, how do you beat that?
I would say the most, the one that comes to mind for me would be Incredipede, because it was a cool game, but it also had, I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but also had like a really interesting story where Colin and his wife like are traveling around the world while developing this game, and you know all the places they went to sort of influenced the design of the game. So that's sort of like an interesting example of like the story and the game sort of coming together for like a cool outcome.
I don't know if this is like a real direct answer to that question, but I maybe it's not the most memorable, but the game that stuck with me the most in the last year because I can't stop playing it is Hero Academy. And that's one of those games that it's got that sort of built-in great turn-based addictive factor. There's enough to do every turn that you play it that you keep going back to it. It's not a simple one move and wait, right? You've got I'm thinking people are familiar, right? Yeah.
It's usually the answer, like the game that we always go back to
Yeah.
afterwards. Just
Yeah,
because we're playing so many games that the one game that we go back to, that's obviously the one game we enjoyed the most and want to think about more and always go back to again. So that's the answer. Really. Sorry, I just interrupted you.
No, please.
Okay, I do that. So.
I'm good.
For a story I've actually written, as opposed to like a gaming experience specifically, it would probably be when I wrote about I Get This Call Every Day, because it was just such a weird, bizarre time that I wrote the story about it, where it was in between when the Toronto Star story got written about the game and he got fired. And it just, I put it out not really expecting the story to do much, and then I look over at our Chartbeat chart and it's the #1 story across the entire network, and I'm like, huh, when did that happen?
Maybe I'm a little biased because it's Toronto-based, and also maybe just because it's at the forefront of my mind because the new DLC pack just came out. But Sound Shapes, which I guess almost a year ago to this month, I reviewed when I was at Ars Technica. I actually didn't so much review. It was more of a, I sat down with Jonathan Mack and basically just talked a whole bunch about just sort of all like the genesis of the game and sort of a bunch of the fun technical challenges of, you know, trying to create a game that is, you know, essentially based around a constantly looping, steady tempoed sort of beat. which is really, really sort of interesting when you consider all the strange ways that players can die on off beats and tempo and rhythm and things like that. So I don't know. I really, really like music and I really like games. So it was a fun sort of opportunity for me to do both of those things together in an article. And I think I Am Robot and Proud, whose name I am blanking on right now, that's it, right? Was also involved in that as well. So that was fun.
We employ at Post Arcade a 10-point or numerical scale, 10 points for our rating system. I think we all use rating systems. What are your thoughts on the use of rating systems, how they're being used today, and is that something that we, when comparing different games, and I know this is something we've come across when someone's reviewing an indie title versus Mass Effect, you give each game a 9, what does it mean? How do you guys see, numerical rating systems evolving over time?
I mean, I personally don't, every time we shoot, I feel like we talk so much about the game and what we like, what we don't like, and then that's how we wrap it up. We wrap it up with the score, and I hate when people fix it on the score and focus on the score because that's how they remember about it really, and that's what they see when they go to the website and they see that we reviewed this game and this is the number we gave it, but it's not about the number, and it's never about the number to me. It's always about what we're saying with our review and in our review. So the number is something like, I just feel like we have to do it because that's the way we wrap it up, but I feel sad giving a number. It makes me sad.
Numbers on games on reviews are bullshit. But that said, they are completely necessary. Games, a true critique of a game will not look at a game like on a linear curve. Like a game is not X better than Y. It might be Z better than Y. On a completely different axis. Assuming that you can only have like one direction of talking about something is very limiting. That said, they are the #1 way in which readers engage with the reviews. They are a grabby way of getting people in the first place. And honestly, they make the person reviewing it sort of put up or shut up because they have to actually be firm on what they think about the game. Where if you have a non-numbered review, you can be a little bit wishy-washy about whether you think it's good or not.
That said, games are not these sort of static little things that come on cartridges anymore and never get updates. And I think we kind of saw this with SimCity, which I was given the impossible task of assigning a number to when all was said and done. And I waited until a few weeks after the game came out. And even then, it's like, when you have games now that have so many moving parts and experiences can change drastically, over time and over years, it's sort of scores become really, really hard, and it becomes the sort of thing where it's very much a reflection of maybe what a game was like at a certain time, but not of what a game is like now. And either you have to be really, really diligent about going back and playing a game every few months, which can be kind of impossible if you're constantly reviewing games, which I'm not, but I'm just giving you sort of a scenario here. So yeah, it becomes really, really tough where games are sort of these more like malleable, amorphous things that are in a constant state of flux, and I think it really becomes hard to sort of say, well, this game's a 7, when maybe a year's time it may be a 9, or maybe it'll be a 4. Who knows?
Yeah, but on that note too, I mean, what you've written, numbers or not, is also malleable, right? When you think about it. I mean, the game that you wrote about and loved or hated today, 2 years from now, is going to be completely like. It's almost like games need to be re-reviewed on a regular basis. I mean, that's impossible, but that's sort of the situation we're stuck with now, right? Like, we've even had that recently. I had one game that was we were given the quote-unquote final build before a game came out, and then 2 days after the game came out, it was updated, and they said, well, no, you already have to change the review because we fixed the things you complained about, so get back in there, rewrite it. And I miss the days when everything was just done. Very much.
That actually leads to another question from the audience, which is, is it better to, when you're dealing with games, because now we can give people access to sometimes to games that are still unfinished or in beta, is it better to wait until a game is complete before you send it off to a reviewer, or is it better to send out something in a beta if you're looking to create buzz?
I think that you need to be very clear in what you send out. I'm happy to play anything at any stage as long as you explain to me where you feel it's at when I'm writing about it. If it's an alpha and you're just showing it to me to say, listen, this will give you an idea of what the gameplay is going to be like, but this is nowhere near the finished product, I'm going to have that knowledge when I go to write the piece. If you just send it to me and say, hey, here's my game right now, can you write about it? It's coming out. I need to know where the game is at. I'm more than happy to play something in a pre-release state, but if it's not ready to release to the public final build, don't ask me to review it. Yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you can spend money on it, it can be reviewed, I think. Like, if you have an in-game store where somebody can dump $50, then it can be reviewed. No matter if you call it beta or what.
So that we have to put a number, like I have to put a number at the end of whatever you give me, so you have to think about that too. I just feel like I want you to be really proud of what you're sending me. I want you to feel like this is it for you, and you would love this game too. So that's what I want from you, so that way when I score it, I can feel good about the score that I give it, and not have to say, but with an update, like I don't even want to do that. I want it to be perfect from you when you send it to me.
Yeah, like when you send someone an early build, it also doesn't have to be for coverage right then. Like people send me betas all the time, and it gives me an idea if it's something that is a good fit for our site, and if it's something I will want to cover when it does launch.
That said, I think if you also have a really, really sort of interesting or novel sort of concept, and maybe you're still prototyping it or working it out, you want to see how it kind of plays with, sort of the wider public, and you kind of, release this thing, or you contact a few people and say like, hey, I think I have something really cool or really different here, you maybe want to have a preview or take a look. Then I think that also kind of gives us a cool way to sort of, see something on the ground floor, write about it, and then when we go and sort of maybe, do an actual review later on, or see another preview or something you put out, then we sort of have a frame of reference. We can say, oh yeah, we got to see this game, when it was still sort of, small little embryo, and now look what it is, right? And I think a great example of that, which like any coverage that I see of Spy Game, I totally I don't know if you guys remember Spy, I'm sure most of you are. Or Spy Party, my God, sorry. Spy Party, and I just love like any sort of bit of coverage I can see of Spy Party is great, because I remember when it went from being all sort of like really, really basic sort of demos to, I think you guys at the Verge over there ran that really nice, or maybe it was Polygon ran that. Polygon. Again, you'd think as a journalist I'd be able to get my facts straight. But yeah, and just being able to sort of see like, oh yeah, I saw this game when it was all just really blocky polygons, and now I can see all these like awesome character models that are being designed for it. It's cool to sort of see that process, and that doesn't necessarily necessitate a review. It's just you get to see it as it's in progress.
At the same time, that like doesn't work for everything, and people can get sick of your game if they've been hearing about it for 2 years. Like by the time it comes out, they might not particularly care anymore.
Did anyone care when Minecraft came out? Like came out, it was the sort of thing that had been out for years, right?
Sure.
But
There's a question from the audience that is, why are games always in the tech section of a newspaper and not the culture section? Which I think is a good question. If you don't mind, I'll take a crack at this one, which is just that you need to have someone, because video games are not a priority in a lot of major media organizations, you kind of need somebody to take that on. I mean, we really weren't doing games coverage at the Post until Dan started doing it, on his free time. We did it out of the art section originally because we didn't have a strong tech presence in the Financial Post. And even now, I feel like Post Arcade in the Financial Post is still kind of a bit of a weird fit because we're this business publication. It's an important industry, and there's obviously certain stories that are related to the video game industry that I think belong there. But at the same time, I'd love to see, frankly, I think it's the kind of thing that deserves its own property. But I'm happy to let you guys weigh in.
In the case of the Post specifically, it's because the advertising was just more there in the tech section, and B, Matt was a supportive editor in tech, and in arts, none of the guys play video games. So, I was happy writing for arts. I felt that it was a little bit easier for it to be criticism in arts, but I went where there was editorial support.
Yeah, so sorry, there's no real big story there. That's all that was.
well, it's totally changing, but I think that it also sort of comes from the roots of just how people used to write about games in, let's say the 90s to early 2000s, where you'd read a game review and there would usually be, a few paragraphs talking about what graphics card it ran really well on, or, how well the AI was, or the physics, or, things that were inherently sort of technical in nature was how I think a lot of people approached game reviews in the past, and you totally don't see that anymore, where you can read a review of something and, you know, the entire review is just about the story, the experience, and just sort of the entire, you know, feeling of playing a game, which I think is awesome. And that definitely falls way more into the culture side. And I think that's definitely where, you know, where games writing really fits these days.
By the same token, technology suffers from the same problem where it's either usually lumped in with science or it falls under the business side of a publication, whereas technology has obviously become something that a lot of people would argue would stand up on its own. Great question from the audience here about developer blogs or journals from the developers themselves. What do you guys think of them? Do you read them as a source of inspiration for stories or a way to find stories? Should developers be telling their own stories on blogs?
Yes, very, very much so, yes. In fact, at Gamezebo, we really enjoy reposting great developer content. If you guys have written something really interesting on the industry or a takeaway from your game, that sort of thing, we're always happy to try to share that with our audience in a straight repost. As well, we're always encouraging kind of well-written developers to contribute developer diaries, that sort of thing, right to our site, which we love. But obviously, if you're not looking to do that, I know I certainly enjoy reading them, and it makes me far more interested in covering a game than it otherwise would, I'd say.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I love when there's a link to a blog, like right in the game if I go into it on my device. I just reviewed a game called Pulse, I think it was, and there was a link to the blog, and it made me feel more connected. I love that I have this human element that's added to this game that I'm just playing. Like, I don't even think when I'm reviewing, I can't think of the people, because if I think of the people, then oh my god, what if I don't like the game? I'm going to give it a bad score. It's going to hurt feelings. I don't want to do that. But if I have, and then I have this blog that's attached to it, so I know what they're doing, and I know that they want to put more into the game or what they're planning on next, and then I can talk about that in my review as well. So I absolutely love that.
One thing I would suggest is maybe like using Gamezebo blogs, because I scan there pretty much every day. There's a lot of really shitty stuff on there, but there's a lot of really good stuff too. And it's kind of easier because it's centralized. You're not like searching for. I mean, if I don't know about your game, I'm not going to be reading your developer blog, right? But if it's there, it seems like a lot of people kind of dual post on their site and Gamezebo, so that's maybe a good idea.
There's another interesting question here from the audience about, and Marissa, you mentioned sort of bad reviews. Have you guys ever experienced significant backlash for a review that you've done, either from publishers or from the community through fan comments or whatever? And if so, how did you deal with it? And I know we all have, so who wants to go first?
I don't have a good story about how I dealt with it, but when I used to write for Ars Technica, I did a review of Pixel Junk Shooter 2, which I kind of didn't like as much as the first one, and Dylan Cuthbert called it Ars Technica on Twitter. I guess there's like a butt joke, Ars Technica.
Oh, Ars.
Yes.
I did took years for it too.
Yeah.
Do you want to hear the story about when they threatened us with a libel lawsuit because we didn't like their game? Or do you want to hear the story about the developer who told me I was personally responsible for his family living in a car for the next 6 months?
Please tell me they're not the same story.
They are not.
All right, well, you can pick one.
Oh, why not? I'll tell them both. We had I mean, obviously, I'm not naming any names here because I don't want to follow up. But there was a certain developer who had released a Plants vs. Zombies clone, and we said as much in the review after they had begged us to write a review. I'm not sure what they were expecting. And yeah, so they immediately, it wasn't even a polite reply, a hey, we're not happy with what you said. They went straight to take the review down or we're lawyering up.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a treat. That was a treat. The other one, I didn't even write the review. That was my favorite because eventually the way I ended it, you're wondering how these got resolved in the end. I ended up blocking him on Twitter and my Gmail. That's how that got resolved because I couldn't. 6 months was too much. I was done. Yeah, we had one of our writers had written a completely fair review. It wasn't even really that harsh about this gentleman's mobile game, and he was not happy with how it went. And both myself and the writer were deluged on a weekly basis from this gentleman about his unhappiness with the situation. So if there's one takeaway, guys, it's okay to not be happy with the review you get, and it's okay to let us know, I would say. I think it's all on how you do it, right? If you come to us and say, hey, listen, I didn't think it was fair because of A, B, and C, I'm the first guy to look into A, B, and C and see if you're right. It's always possible that the writer missed something or anything really, right? But yeah, when you come with lawsuits or telling me what I've done to your family, I'm not that receptive. That's my two stories.
No, I'd agree with that because, I mean, as an editor, I don't play every game that Dan and Chad and Matt play. Like, in fact, I play almost none of them. I play what I play, and they have their own stuff. So, I mean, as an editor, you're not always privy to what your reviewers are doing. You try, but so I'm very receptive if someone thinks that a review is unfair.
Absolutely.
As long as you approach it the right way.
Yeah, well, I have a bunch of different stories, but mostly now I just try not to respond to any of the comments on the Facebook page or anything that happens on the actual website. It's just best not to engage in that kind of stuff publicly. There was a gentleman that was really upset about something that Scott C. Jones had reviewed, and he was really, I thought it was a great review. Like, he gave it a 7. It's pretty good for Scott. Like, I thought that was great. But he said that no, they had to shut down their company, and that, so like really making it feel guilty. I didn't even review it, but I felt so awful for this dude. But yeah, just for the most part. But a good positive thing is when somebody doesn't like, or if they build a personal relationship with me, which is always great to do, and then I get their game and I let them know before I review it, like, look, it's not going to be good. I'm just letting you know, like, we're going to go shoot today, and I'm not going to give it a good score. I just can't. And then this person that I built this relationship with said, okay, you know what, I understand completely. It was our first try. We'll do better next time. I'm like, okay, that's great. And they actually did better next time, and that made me feel so good. And I really don't like hurting people's feelings. That's what you're getting from this. I don't like doing it, but if you build this personal relationship with me, and then we have a positive back and forth, it always makes me feel a lot better about it.
For the most part, chat reviews the bad games, so I get to avoid that. But I haven't really gotten blowback from a company specifically, but sometimes in the comments, I remember when I reviewed Final Fantasy 13-2, and I didn't like it very much. And this is before we had scores, so it was all because I called it incomprehensible gobbledygook. And man, I took it as a personal mission to respond to every single comment on that thread. That was a bad idea. I've never done that ever again.
There's a really good question here about content marketing or sort of paid content, I guess is one way of saying it. This is something that a lot of media organizations, including the National Post, are obviously experimenting with. And for those of you that may be unfamiliar with it, it's quite often, think of it like sponsored stories. An advertiser approaches a publication with, they would like their stuff to appear around something around big data or cloud computing, or in this particular case about video games or a particular kind of video game. And then the editorial side is to go off and to actually create the game and the content independent of what the advertising is going to say. What do you guys think of content marketing? Necessary evil? Something to avoid? What do you think?
I feel like I have to say necessary evil because we just posted our first sponsored post this afternoon. So it's tough. I think that, and you guys probably back me up on this, I hope. I think that we're in a weird time right now and this is so boring to everyone, I know, the financial end of game journalism. It's weird. Advertising models have changed, and a lot of the ways that money would come in have disappeared. So I know a lot of places are looking for new options, new ways of trying to generate revenue, while at the same time remaining ethical and doing everything we can to not in any way sully our reputations. And sponsored posts, I think, are one of the ways that a lot of places are trying right now. But that being said, I don't know how great they are in the big picture. I honestly don't know if I see sponsored posts being around more than a year or two. I think this is an experiment. I don't see it lasting. I think there's a credibility gap. I think the fact that people who run them are smart enough to put in big glowing lights. Oh, look at that, there is a difference, wow. Big glowing lights, sponsored posts, and they make it blatantly clear that this is sponsored. I think that's important. I think the places that don't do that, that's a really, really iffy practice. But for the most part, any reputable site you go to makes it very clear that it's sponsored, and I think that's probably the most important thing to it. Okay, use your mic for us today.
Great.
before you got there, so that's fine. We've done it a couple of times. It's, it was kind of, there was a, it was one, we did a couple stories, they were all labeled sponsored content. We were very explicit about it, but I'm with you, I don't know. It seems to be an experiment that the entire industry is playing around with. I don't know how effective it's going to be, but I guess that depends on how much money media organizations end up making from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Another one from the audience. When you're writing your reviews or your stories about games, are you writing for gamers or non-gamers? And I think maybe this may depend differently on your target audience. But what are you thinking about? Who is your audience when you're writing?
Sure. I can jump in. Why not? Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I think you're right. I think it all depends on the publication that you're writing for. I could absolutely see coming from a newspaper end, writing certainly more general kind of non-gamer thing. From where we're at with Gamezebo, the way I try to look at it is I'm writing for the rest of the people that write for Gamezebo. Everyone who works with us is very enthusiastic about games and loves them and knows them well enough. So if it's something that I can share around with anyone else who works in the editorial team, and they get excited about the game that I'm writing about, then I know I've done a good job. So that's sort of the way I look at it. If I can please them, then I know I'm pleasing our audience. But again, I think it really depends on where you're writing for. If you're writing, Andrew has the fun task of trying to be the video game voice of the sister site to a video game site. That's a challenge, man. You miss your days at Gamezebo, I admit it. A little bit. And if I was in Andrew's shoes, yeah, I could definitely see having to write to a more of a non-gamer approach, right? Because a lot of the people who read The Verge are probably not gamers first.
Yeah, and that's why, like we were talking about before, why sort of having an angle or having an in for the story is important, because if I publish something, it's got to be, or I try to make it interesting to anyone who's visiting the front page of The Verge, which could be someone who's there for like a science or someone who's obsessed with Lumia phones or whatever, right? So yeah, that's why the hook we're talking about before is important for a publication like The Verge.
I think it also depends too on the sort of game that I'm reviewing, because obviously I'm going to write a very sort of I'm going to focus on different things if I'm writing about Call of Duty versus writing about Journey. In the sense that if I'm writing about a Call of Duty game where it's all about being able to kill people really fast. Dude Bros, exactly. Yeah. So I might talk about like Dude Bros or the people playing it, or just talk about input controls, or how I'm going to be able to switch between weapons. All these things that might be more gaming focused than, let's say, talking about something like Journey, where I'm just talking about the strange experience of meeting other players in this ethereal internet sort of. So you know what I mean? Like it sort of depends on the game, which I think is a big factor as well.
For me, I get to be really selfish and just review the game for myself, and then just talk about why I like it and why I don't like it, if it's for me or not. And that's the beauty part of reviews in the run. But then I also, a lot of mobile games are geared toward children as well, so I will mention that. Or if it's a casual game, like, you might want to show this to your grandma. Like, I'll still say something like that, but the score is always how I feel about it.
I review games for my Facebook friends. And that sounds sort of funny, but it's sort of like people who are maybe interested in games, they'll maybe buy 2 or 3 or 4 games a year, but they're not into games. They probably wouldn't call themselves gamers. I think that is sort of the core audience of what I aim my writing for at Post Arcade, and I think that when you're online primarily, that's where I'd be aiming. I'd be aiming a little bit broader if it's going to be something that's going to go into print, although that doesn't happen all that often anymore. But yeah, it's like I want to convince somebody who is game friendly why this particular thing might be for them or not for them.
Dan's basically writing for me. I surround myself with really good people who know a lot about games, whether it's Chad or Matt or Dan or Matthew O'Mara here in the second row, who writes about indie games, who you should go talk to after. He's the only guy in the room with a tie.
Sideburns.
Yes. But as a guy who, I would never call myself a gamer. I like video games, but frankly, I suck at them. And so I often try to, the stuff on Post Arcade I try to make it accessible to people who I think, are coming to a financial Post audience a lot of the time, but that other people I think will get something out of. A topic that I wanted to bring up that I'm pretty interested in because we've been seeing a little bit about it recently is making games journalism more inclusive. We've obviously seen a lot recently about the role that women play in the video game industry and also in games journalism. I guess I'm just kind of curious for how you guys think we need to evolve our thinking about games journalism to be more inclusive and whether or not we're on the right path.
I think Marissa said it earlier when she said, "Dude bros." Dude bros. I mean, that's kind of the beat. I think we're at a point where everyone is a little bit more enlightened that the core gaming audience is not, as people thought for a long time, white straight dudes in their 20s. It's actually a very, very diverse, wide variety of audience. That I think when you get into I think the people in this room know that. But I think that when we talk about sort of people maybe in the wider industry, it's still a bit of a tougher thing to get through. And I think as a result, the great thing about just writing more about indie games and seeing all these people make sort of indie games that become really, really successful rather, or are covered in a lot of places, is that more people now are exposed to just the wide variety of games that you can get and realize that hey, there's probably a game out there that caters to me or speaks to me, which is kind of really, really awesome in a way that I don't think existed for a long time. So.
Do you mean just like making games, like just women in the industry in general? This is a really heavy topic.
Yes. I'm speaking more specifically from the journalism side.
Okay. I do. Well, I feel like for myself, it's been tough because I'm always going into a situation just with this notion that this person just thinks I'm this girl that got this job because I'm a girl and I don't know anything about video games, so I really have to prove myself now. And it gets really annoying because I'll play this game in my head constantly. So now I just feel like I'm meeting so many more amazing women in this industry, and that's making me feel a little bit more included, I'd say. Because for a long time I felt like I was definitely on the outside looking in, and then I also didn't want people to feel like I got this job because I have a vagina. And that happens a lot. I'll just leave it there, but really. Can't say more than vagina. Okay.
Anyone want to follow that?
So I got my job because I have a vagina? Oh, right, the good mic.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm sheltered. I think that might be my problem with the answer I'm about to give. But I've had the good fortune to work with some amazing women in game journalism. Some of the best writers that I work with even today are women. And whenever I hear from other people that there aren't enough women in games journalism, that it's hard for women in games journalism, I'm sure that's accurate, but from my experience, I've never seen that, and that's probably because I'm one of those single white males that you were talking about. That's possible. But yeah, I've some of the single best game journalists out there that I've worked with and that I've had the pleasure of reading and editing are women. So I don't know how much of it is myth and reality, but again, that's probably just that whole white male doesn't get what's going on in the rest of the world thing. That's very possible.
Yeah, I mean, like, just to play devil's advocate, there's, a lot of white dudes sitting in front of you right now. So, there definitely is a diversity problem in terms of the people who cover. I mean, it's getting better, but there definitely is an overwhelming number of white dudes. I mean, you go to any event. I mean, you go to GDC in the press room, and it's like, fine, where's Waldo finding someone who's not.
I think part of the issue about it too is that most of the white dudes in the industry are pretty open about non-white dudes entering it, but they're also looking out for number one too. So they really work on their own career, and if it's between themselves getting a job and fighting with somebody else, they shut up about something bad that they see or whatnot. And I think that's probably something that we just have to keep an eye out for, is that you have to speak up even when, if you see something bad, even when it isn't necessarily in your own best interest.
Another question from the audience here. What kind of an effect do you think bad reviews or positive reviews in general, have on game sales? How much stock do you think people put into them?
I mean, when we're talking about sort of bigger AAA titles, let's say, I don't think it matters quite as much because a lot of times you're seeing, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people pre-order stuff before it comes out. It's going to sell anyways. I think in the case of maybe smaller games which sort of come out and are under the radar, and there's not sort of this big unified push where everyone in the world knows that this game is coming out on this day, I think then it becomes a little bit more of a, has a little bit more of an effect. Because if you've never heard of, let's say a game that someone makes and the first review or first hearing of it is a bad review or a bad impression of it, then chances are you're probably not going to go buy it, you're probably not going to go play it. So I think they can definitely play more of a, or have more of an effect if your game is less known or if no one's heard of your game, which kind of sucks for you guys, I'm sorry.
It's also kind of weird, it depends on which way the SEO winds are blowing too. Like a bad review that doesn't show up on the first search page of Google, doesn't mean anything, nor does a good review if it doesn't show up on the first page of Google. But at the same time, if somebody drops you something and it's showing up as your #1 hit when you search for it, that's going to have a big effect regardless of what it says either way.
I think there are probably people who are going to buy your game regardless of reviews. I think the number of people impacted by reviews, it's significant, but it's not significant enough that it's going to make or break your game at any point. I think reviews are really important, whether good or bad, for branding. The more people see your game's name out there, if you're reviewed on a dozen sites that somebody reads, and then the next time they're on the App Store, they see it in featured, they're going to go, oh, no, I remember something about that game. Hang on a second. And they're going to, that's when the download's going to happen. I don't think there are a lot of people who read a review, even no matter how simple it is nowadays with mobile games and digital storefronts. No one's going to read a review and run out that minute and buy the game, even if it's free, even if it's 99 cents. But it's going to build up that brand. It's going to build up that, oh, no, that game did sound good. I do remember reading about that when they come across it. So I don't think it's as impactful as people think, but at the same time, that's kind of the long-term impact is there.
Easier as people who write about games realize that they can't, this doesn't go for everyone, but I think that there are definitely people who realize that, to be good at writing games, especially if you're coming from a criticism perspective, you can't just write about things that you like. You really have to sort of, in the same way you listen to music or you watch movies that you might not normally listen to or watch, I think increasingly people are doing that with games. So, you're not going to necessarily have, probably not as hard of a time as you would to have sort of things that might be considered niche covered, because there's going to be people who say like, oh, hey, a game that deals with religious themes, I don't usually write about that, but hey, that could be really, really neat to try to sort of expand, my horizons and learn more about sort of the different ways that this medium can, work to tell stories. So I think it's become easier, but maybe my perspective's a little skewed, but yeah.
And increasingly these niche games are becoming part of the mainstream conversation. I think in the past month and a half on the Giant Bombcast, they talked about Cart Life, Depression Quest, and Papers, Please. Could you imagine that a year ago? Or even 2 years ago, or anything like that? But I think that because these things are becoming more mainstream, at least within the hardcore sort of game space, it's easier to sort of talk about them because you want to have your own sort of say in the conversation because these games are thought-provoking and interesting.
I'd like to talk about the way in which people are reading games and how they're finding the content that they read. Obviously there are certain publications that people go to because they like a particular writer or they like the publication, but a lot of people get their game news from aggregators, whether it's Reddit or something else. How does the rise of social, how does the rise of social media, but the way that people are sort of, accessing stories in a different way, how is that changing, the way that people are reading, but how is it changing the way you guys do your jobs and how you're putting your stories out there?
That's a really good question.
I needed to get one.
Yeah. I think it does make things tougher in a way from our end. Definitely. I don't even know which mic's the right one now. Here we go. Hello. I think it does make things tougher from our end. it makes us want to write more to that core audience that we already have, but at the same time, it makes us want to go completely in the opposite direction to try to get the attention of the people in these places like Reddit and News for Gamers and things like that. So many people are going to those sources that you want to be where they're at, but where they're at isn't necessarily what you're already doing, right? So you've got to tweak what you're doing a bit to try to bring in that audience that's going in that direction. Because it's getting tough. I mean, there was a time when people would come to your site every day in, day out, see what was new, and now they just follow it on Facebook or Twitter in the hopes that you share something, right? So, I don't know. It's definitely a different time. It's hard to really qualify how that's affected things, but it definitely has.
I think it definitely, from a reader's perspective, it definitely changes sort of how likely someone is to read about something they don't already know about. Unlike, if you're reading a magazine and you're flipping through, you might see a cool story that you didn't know about. When it's just a link, I think you're much less likely to click on it if you're not already interested or know something about it. So I think it makes it more difficult to sort of introduce people to things they don't already know or care about.
You want to go?
I don't know, do you want to get something else in?
Well, I got a couple more questions, but if you want to go, it's all yours. No? All right. I want everybody to put their thinking caps on, think about the future here for a second. What are we, we look out a couple of years, what does the future of game journalism look like? Are we looking at more investigative pieces? Are we looking at more video content, easily digestible, smaller reviews? What do you guys think is going to take over, or are we looking at a mix of it all?
More personality, even more so than now, and more video. I think that going forward, you're going to see things where you have to be sort of actively engaged to get the most out of it. Just because, for a large part, you see people not engaging nearly as much with just text or skimming over it quickly, and it's a lot easier to monetize video, frankly.
As far as content goes, I would love to see things go more into the direction that some of the writing in film and music has gone, where, you have people sort of getting in at the ground floor of, let's say the development of a game, or just being able to shadow someone or talk to someone, or to spend a lot of time with people, early on or throughout the development process, and, not necessarily in a way where you have to sit on all this content for 4 years and wait until the game's already ready to launch to say, hey, I was there at the beginning. I mean, I think if there was more openness where, the industry was at such a state where you could, write a story and say, hey, like, Ubisoft's working on a new Assassin's Creed game, and they only just started, and they have no clue what the fuck they're doing, but we're here to talk to them about it. And see, like, that's the sort of thing I think you get more of with, like, music and movies, and it would be really cool if we got some more of that, more of that openness and just more of those sort of different looks into how elements of the industry work.
Excellent. Well, I think that's going to do it for our time tonight. We do have where are we going, 244?
Bar 244.
Bar 244 up on Adelaide. But before we end off, I'd like a round of applause